Hi, and welcome to another Fiber Friday. Uh, Today we are going to start working with our yarn and using what I've covered in my last couple videos on how to pick the yarn and the hook size according to the label and or the wraps per inch method. If you need to see how to do that, please go ahead and watch those videos if you haven't already. If you have, we're going to go ahead and get started. Now for today's video, I'm going to be using this blue yarn and a white yarn. The blue yarn is going to be Big Twist Petite, which does recommend a 5mm hook. The white yarn, I did not have a label for, but when I did the wraps per inch, puts it at that same 4-weight yarn. So I'm going to be using the same hook. Now, unfortunately for me, I don't know where my 5mm or even my 5.5mm hook is, so I am going to be using my 6mm, as this is not a very tight precision work. This is just going to be me showing you how to do the stitches. So going up a stitch size with my hook is not going to make a drastic difference in how these stitches come out. If I was following a pattern, I would want to try to use that appropriate hook size again. Oh, my brain likes to die on me today. That's what it was. If I have figured it out, I'm hoping to be able to put chapter sections here in the YouTube video. If I haven't figured out how to do that quite yet, every single spot in the video will have a timestamp for each section listed in the description below, just in case. That being said, if you're here for a specific portion of the video, you can skip to just that, or you can also watch the whole thing. Some things I will be adding, I briefly discussed some of it in the last video with the yarn label, which is abbreviations. Last time we went over the difference between wraps per inch and works in progress. The ones that are going to be used in this video are going to be more set to the exact stitches and symbology that's used in written patterns. I will, when we get to starting patterns and stop going over the basic stitches, do a small recap of a written pattern versus the symbol pattern before we begin doing any kind of projects together. But that's going to be combining everything I'm showing in each of these videos into one big video on that, without the teaching you how to do the stitch, but going over what it is, if that makes any sense. So I will either be adding them like I did last time with the words there, or I will be cutting away to a separate cut screen that I have made using a free paint-like program that I have. But each of those vocabularies and techniques, I will try to give the difference between the American and the UK terms, as well as if there's any difference in stitches. Some of them are very consistent, others are not so much. I will attempt at times to show the difference between right and left-handed techniques. Unfortunately, while I am semi-ambidextrous, I am right-hand dominant, so most of what I know with crochet is done with my right hand. So let's go ahead and get started in some of the more fun parts of crochet. Okay, so one of those fun parts that I was talking about is a personal preference of everybody. It's whether you're going to hold your hook using the pen style or the knife style. So for the pen style, you're just going to hold it like you're about to write. If you're going to use the knife grip, you're going to hold it like you're about to cut a steak or a piece of chicken or something. How you tend to work with your yarn is going to be 100% your choice on how you like to hold your hook. I am a knife grip girly. It's how I've always held it. Again, that's a personal preference on what feels most comfortable with the hook in your hand. They should not affect how your stitches come out, as what will affect it more is your consistency and the practice you get in doing those stitches. I haven't seen or heard of anyone saying that they make a difference in how your stitches look. The only thing I can say that would make a difference is if you're trying to use the pen style grip, but your hand doesn't like it and you would rather use the knife style grip, your stitches are going to come out sloppier. Use what is most comfortable for you to achieve your best results. So before you can begin working any kind of pattern, there are some basic things that you have to start with. The first of which is going to be your foundation. Now your foundation is either going to be a chain stitch, a foundation chain stitch, or a magic ring, magic circle, magic loop. It's referred to as a variety of different things. Primarily, most people do begin with a simple chain stitch. It's the simplest, it's the first one most of us learn, and it's where a lot of basic projects start. Now, there are other ways to use the chain stitch or foundation type stitches, and I'm sure that there are way more fancy foundations than those three, but I'm not aware of them. The three that I do know is a foundation chain, which makes a neater starting chain, but it does use more yarn. It's also great when you're using multicolored yarn to be able to have one stitch at a certain spot and another color at the other spot. It, however, is not a required starting point. So we are going to start with just the most basic chain stitch. The chain stitch is going to have its own graphic as well as abbreviation when written in a crochet pattern. Okay, so here you can see some of the basic symbols and definitions. In a written pattern, it will either spell out the word chain or it'll give you the abbreviation CH. Now, those can come with a number before or after them, such as chain 3, and that'll tell you to chain 3, or chain 36, or how many ever stitches that you should be putting in your chain. The basic symbol can be written as either a basic oval, a straight up and down oval, or if there's multiple stitches in the pattern, you may see the number of chains linked in either a straight up method or a crossed, depending on how the pattern is written and where those stitches are at. Typically, the chain in the directly up mark is going to be when you're creating a new row or to get to a stitch height that you need to have. The lower ones are typically when you're moving from, this is where the row is at and you're going from point A to point B and not needing to go up a new height layer, or you're at the foundation and creating your foundation stitches. Alright, so before we can go ahead and start making those chain stitches, we have to start with the slip knot. Now I'm going to show it first here on the larger screen, and then I'm going to try to do a close-up on my hands of making it. However, in order to do that, we need to pull out our yarn. Depending on the yarn type and yarn style you have, you'll either be pulling from the outside of the yarn, so the outside pull, or the center pull. I have this one already set up and ready for the center pull. We're going to learn some other definitions here, first of which is the working end, and our tail end. So our tail end is going to be where the yarn ends. This is going to be the part we're typically not going to be working with quite frequently. And our working end is going to be the part that is attached to the yarn ball. Now there are very few patterns, but there are some that will ask you to start where your slip knot is adjusted by the tail. Those are very specific patterns and not super common. Most of them will want it to be adjusted using the working end. In order to make the slip knot, I typically will make a basic X shape. Now where the back of the yarn touches, I will fold it over and pull through. At that point in time, I can adjust the loop using my working end. So here's my tail end, and I can either make it larger or tighter. Depending on how good you get at making these, you can make it to where your tail end is significantly smaller, and you're able to adjust using that working end of the yarn to be as large of a loop as you need to start with, or as small of a loop. Now, let's see if I can. So again, I will cross the yarn over. This is the tail end. I'll have my fingers through, and I'll just bend it over, pull that yarn through that loop. Another method I have seen people do is to take their crochet hook, make that same loop, but then take the yarn from either a yarn over or a yarn under, which is our next definition. So yarn over and yarn under refers to how the yarn goes over the hook. Now, there are reasons you'll pick one or the other. Typically, if you are doing amigurumi, if you want tighter stitches, you're going to do the yarn under, whereas if you're just working a regular project, yarn over is fine. So I have my hook. The opening of the hook I will have facing you. So if I am yarning over, I will bring it up over, so that way it just sits right there. If I'm doing yarn under, I'll bring it from under the hoop and over. You can see one issue that happens there is this tends to pull the whole loop all the way around. So the first stitch on it can always be a little bit troublesome. You'll want to practice yarn over or yarn under depending on what you're working with. Now, that being said, there are, as you can see on the screen here, yeah, haha, figured it out. You've got yarn under and yarn over. Typically, the patterns don't always tell you which one to use. This is somewhat of a preference choice, but also somewhat of how you want the stitches to come out. You can practice using any of the above methods where you yarn over, then yarn under. You can yarn over, yarn under, and then yarn under, and yarn under and then yarn over. Now that'll make a little bit more sense when we get to making the actual chain stitches and single crochet stitches and above, but it just refers to how many times, like if I'm making my stitch for my chain stitch, am I going to yarn over and pull through? So depending on how your stitch is done, those are the options. That is what I will be referring to if I'm referencing yarn over or yarn under. Now let's get back to making that slip knot. Okay. So we're going to make the slip knot using those methods. I'm going to go ahead right now and bring that camera all the way down to my fingers here. and let you guys be able to see, hopefully on a bit more of a close-up, on how well that works. Okay, so got my hook here. I've got my tail end and the working end. Okay. So if I were to lay this down, lay my tail end across the top there, I can then lift this piece up over, and then I can pull this center piece that is in the inside of that loop, holding both the tail and the working end, up. And now I've got my slip knot. The tail end is here, and the working end will loosen and tighten that stitch. You can also do this with the hook, where again, tail end goes over the top. If I hold this down this way and use the hook to grab the working end of the yarn and then pull it up over, you get that same slip knot. There are other methods that I have seen out there on this. I typically like the one where you just twist it like this, reach through, and pull the yarn up. It's the same as the X pattern down here, just up in the air in my fingers. That is how I make the basic slip knot, which is probably the easiest thing to make on crochet. However, practice it. Practice it 100 or 1,000 times. It's going to be a very useful technique to do. And then you're going to want to practice 1,000,000 times how to do the chain stitch. Now, if you're learning this to help teach a smaller child, I recommend with the chain stitch, we start out doing it with our fingers. So in the loop with my tail end here, I'll stick my fingers through and I'll grab the working part of the yarn and just pull up until I have a stitch. And then just repeatedly stick my fingers through, and I can tighten that back up and then grab and pull through. There's a lovely lady on social media, I believe I saw her first on TikTok, who does nothing but all of her projects using just her fingers. I think she said she doesn't even have a crochet hook. So it is possible to do this all by finger rather than using any tools. This is how I first learned how to make the chain stitch. This is a great way for small children to get practice and see what the stitch looks like, just sitting here pulling through. Now, the problem with this, as you can see, my stitches are not in any way, shape, or form even. They go from tight to very loose to slightly tight, depending on how much yarn slack I have. So while this is a good practice method for small children, it is not ultimately the most practical when it comes to doing an actual decent stitch to work with for projects. For that, I recommend practicing using the hook. So with my yarn in my hand, I'll hold on to my tail end, and I typically, for most of my projects, tend to go yarn over and pull through. Yarn over, pull through, and just repeat. And I will hold my yarn using a bit of a grip like that, where I'm just holding it there for my tension. Again, tension it however you want, whether you want to use a tension ring or you want to do the wrap it around your finger, loop up here and hold that for tension. Whatever method of tensioning your yarn works best for you, you'll want to do. For me, it's holding it here and then just using that space there to grab a hold of my yarn. And I'll just do this until I get consistent chains. You'll want to practice until your chains look very consistent in size and shape. So already compared to my one done by my fingers, while there is still some flaws in it, it is much more consistent. If I wasn't talking and trying to do things on camera, it would probably be a little bit neater and more consistent than this, but this is already pretty good. We are going to go ahead and go over the anatomy of a chain stitch while I've got you right here. So I'm going to pull up on my working loop, which is that one there attached to the working yarn. We've got the tail end, the slip knot, and if I go here to where my working loop is at, facing me, the closest stitch to me is going to be my front loop. The stitch beyond that is going to be the back loop. Now, if I were to rotate my work to try to start chaining up or working into the next stitch for the single crochet or other stitches, the front loop, I would stick my hook right there. If I had to work in back loops only, I would stick it there. Most of your stitches are going to be worked with the hook going in between and putting 2 loops on the top of your hook for your front loop and your back loop, leaving the back bump or third loop on your bottom half of your hook. Now, if I hold the stitches here, they are going to look like little V's. And if I flip it over, there's going to be that little tiny bump where it's going to have the front, the back loops, and your back bump. It will make a little bit more sense as you see it in person. I don't know if this is going to make it very much easier, but I'm hoping so. All I did was doubled up the yarn and used a slightly larger hook to see this. But again, you've got your front loop, your back loop, and when turned over, you've got the back bump. Those can be important for depending on your project and your pattern. They'll tell you to either go through the front loop, both loops, or back loop, and some will even direct you to start by going through the third loop or the back bump, as it's referred to. That is your basic chain stitch. Practice that until all your stitches look consistent in size and shape. Now, there is another chain method that works really well for starting chains, and it's referred to as the foundation chain. So I went ahead and made a small swatch of one, and as you can see, I've got 2 colors here. The white stitch in my hands is currently my front loop, and the blue stitch is my back loop. Now the difference in this particular foundation chain is that if I rotate it to the side, you can see just the solid blue stitches. There's this section here which has the back bump and looks a little bit messy. And then here, which again has your blue and white stitches. The typical way that I end up with this is great for edging to make sure that your project edge looks very well finished, smooth, and straight on all sides. It's a fancier technique. It's great for if you want to have one color at the start and then another color there. So let me go ahead and switch over to showing you how to make the foundation chain. Okay, if you are using one color, you're going to want to pull the color out until you have the length of chain that you want to start with and make your slip knot by pulling it here. This is one of the areas you would want to start with your tail end being the one that adjusts the tightness on it. If you're using multiple colors, you'll just make your normal slip knot. And you'll choose which color you want to have on the bottom of the stitch versus what color you want to have on the top of the stitch. Separating the colors, I'll yarn under for that one, and then yarn over for the top one, and pull it through. Continue to yarn under, yarn over, and pull through. Continue to make your stitch pattern by yarning over with one color and yarning under with the other. So yarn under, yarn over, yarn under, yarn over, and pull through. And again, it just makes that very nice divided color there. The top one, whichever color you chose to be your top color, if you rotate it to the side, will have your perfect V stitches. You'll have your odd back bump and less perfect stitches with it divided by both colors. Now, when I typically work with a foundation chain, I'm going to have my top stitch either be, for like my working stitch, I'll either go through both loops here, so I have one of each color on my top, but more often than not, I'll rotate it to the side and use the one that has the solid color and work with that one in order to continue my stitches across, as that gives me the cleanest look, and my bottom color will be right there. Now, if I am doing this again, where I'm using just the one color, I'll pull out and make a loop middle of the way into it, and I'll just make sure that the same spot that I'm working with, so I'll hold this here, yarn under, yarn over. The first couple stitches will be somewhat difficult because you're grabbing onto your slip knot and you don't have a tail to help you. So that first one tends to be the most difficult stitch to make sure it's neat and loose. But if I continue to work with it, and again, practice, 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 the more practice you have, the neater these stitches tend to look. But I can just quickly work up a chain, and I can make this chain as long or as short as I want. The stitches tend to look very neat on all sides. If I'm using the same color, I'll typically put the side with the back bump on the bottom and work with the stitches above it, just depending on how I need my finished project to look. Some patterns will tell you how to do this stitch and where they want the bumps to sit at, but this is a great one to start out with to make sure that your bottom edges always look neat and even. If you're going to be working in the round, which means you'll start a stitch here and go all the way around and then come back up the other side and go around, this can be useful to make sure that you have 2 loops here and 2 loops on the other side. Whereas the chain stitch on its own, without that, if you were to be doing that same working in the round, you won't have that same neat edging, and you can end up with some weird gapping in it. So if I was to do that same loop around, I could either choose to go through both loops here, and then I would have my back bump for my second stitch, which can leave a weird little hole gap. So depending on if you're working with wearables or otherwise, you may want to learn to do a foundation chain. It is not necessary, but it can be useful. Those are 2 of the most basic starting methods. Those are going to often be used for flat projects. So what I mean by working with flat projects, those are going to be your dishcloths, your blankets. If you're doing clothing, if you're doing panels for the clothing, rather than something worked in a circle, that's how you're going to be starting them. Different projects will allow for different starting points depending on how many stitches, how much you're doing. The chain stitch can also be used in place of the magic ring, which I will show that when I do go over the magic ring. Where you start on your chain or chain stitch makes a difference, as if you're wanting the neat edges, foundation chains can be wonderful. If you're just wanting to get started practicing and you're wanting to save on some yarn, the basic chain stitch is useful. I would definitely recommend practicing at least the basic chain stitch because those are used in patterns for more than just the starting feature. They're used for turning chains, they're used for gaps between stitches, if you need to leave a space, buttonhole. There's a variety of different things you can do with that. Yes, hello, sir. Hello. Yes. You want to come up here? Come on. Say hello to everyone. Yes, Kai wants to say hello. He's also trying to demand that it's park time. Okay, we'll go soon. Can we get down, please? Please? Can we? Thank you. We'll go here soon. Okay, I'm going to actually go ahead and wrap this video up here. I was planning on trying to do a couple more stitches in this, but we're already at about a half hour. And aside from that very first video, I'm trying to keep them at a half hour or less, more or less. And unfortunately, with covering the single crochet and the magic ring, which were the other two stitches I wanted to cover at least to get started, that is going to take a bit more time in order to adequately cover that material. So I'm going to go ahead and end this week's episode here. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon, evening, day, wherever it is when you're watching this. I am going to go ahead and head out so that way I can take my dog to the dog park so he can go play with his doggo friends and reduce some of his energy. Bye!